Here we actually see several water molecules that are actually bonded together by these hydrogen bonds. Notice how the hydrogens and their positive charges from one water molecule are attracted to the negatively charged oxygen molecule, oxygen atom on another molecule. So these bonds actually create several phenomena that gives water some of its most important characteristics. One thing that these do is they form a surface tension. This is the reason you're actually able to skip a rock across water, because of the tension that these bonds form, out on a lake or body of water. When you throw a rock across it, it will actually skip because these bonds form a tension. Another thing these bonds do is they actually are able to absorb and release energy very slowly, so therefore they're able to withstand a great range of temperature. If you think about it, Fahrenheit, as far as Fahrenheit is concerned, things freeze at 32 degrees, but they boil at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That's quite a range. And another thing is we're able to live in quite a range of temperature. Obviously we could be in too hot or too cold, either one, but we're able to live in quite a range, not just 2 or 3 degrees, but several degrees range of temperature, because we're mostly water, and this has the ability to both absorb and release energy very slowly. Okay, there are several different types of chemical reactions going on in the body. Life boils down in many ways, physiology to the metabolism going on, to the chemistry going on within the body. So what's the nature of these different chemical reactions? Well, the first one we want to look at is called a synthesis reaction. When we synthesize something, we basically just put it together. So this is, a lot of what we're doing with our food groups is we are eating certain things, and then we're breaking them down, and then we're putting them back together for something else that we need to use in our body. So synthesis reactions where basically we're actually taking different things and putting them together, either atoms or molecules themselves, and usually we're absorbing energy in this process. We'll talk specifically about some of those synthetic reactions that's going on in the body a little bit later and relate it back to this name. Of course, if we're putting stuff together in the body, we're also breaking stuff down. So we call this decomposition reactions, where we're breaking it down, and usually when we break something down, we release energy in breaking something down. Okay, here we see something that goes on in the body, especially within our cells, is we actually take our building blocks of proteins, amino acids, and we hook them up in a specific order to build specific proteins. So when we're hooking up amino acids to build a protein, we are doing a synthesis reaction. And then here, another type of reaction that we do, we see in the picture, is glycogen is how we actually store glucose in our body, both in our muscles and in our liver. And but we need to use the individual molecules from that glycogen, the individual glucose molecules. So we'll have to break that down into the individual monosaccharides that we can actually use. So whenever we're breaking something down, whether that be breaking down the glycogen or it could be breaking down the protein that we eat into the amino acids that later on we're going to put back together. But when we're breaking it down, that's a decomposition reaction. When we're putting stuff together, then that's a synthesis reaction. Another important type of reaction is an exchange reaction, where basically we're doing both building and decomposition. And so we're basically switching parts of the molecules to do different jobs. One of the most important jobs in the body is to use energy, and we use energy in the form of ATP, and we release energy by breaking off the N-phosphate group. And then we have to restore that back later so we can restore the energy. So in this case, we're seeing that we can break phosphate off, or we can restore the phosphate. We can exchange the components of the reaction. So an exchange reaction, that's where we're trading places with different parts of our chemical reaction. Okay, so we said our cells are broken down into molecules, and we call these molecules either organic or inorganic molecules or compounds. They do fit in the category of both. And the organic molecules, basically this says contain carbon, but really in reality they contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. All of them contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And this carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are covalently bonded to each other to form molecules, such as the main monosaccharide our body uses, glucose, which we see has on both carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen as C6H12O6. The other organic molecules that are in our body, basically there are 4 of them, and 3 of them, if you think about it, are basically the food groups we eat, such as carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, or what we maybe normally call fats, but we'll call them lipids here. And then the last category are called nucleic acids, which contain things that you've heard of called DNA, RNA, ATP. Now, inorganic compounds mean that they lack either carbon, hydrogen, or oxygen. One of the 3 is missing, and they tend to be simpler molecules that's in our body. Our salts can fall in this category, certain minerals, certain ions, electrolytes. But the biggest example of the inorganic compound and the most numerous molecule in our body is water. Now, again, if you look at water's chemical formula, H2O, notice it's lacking carbon, therefore it would not be considered organic. As we said earlier, water is the most abundant molecule in the body, much less an organic molecule, but the most abundant molecule. And it does have several properties, and these properties are due to the fact that it is polar or charged, and the fact that it has these hydrogen bonds between the molecules. So some of the things that water actually does in the body, it has a high heat capacity. In other words, it has the ability to absorb a large amount of heat and release a large amount of heat before changing forms. It has the ability to dissolve things, and that's mostly because it's charged. So things that are charged will ionize or dissolve in it. It is basically the solvent for any solution. In other words, all that chemistry that's going on in the body is going on in a watery environment. So it helps the chemical reactivities that are going on in the body. And it serves as a cushion. It cushions a lot of things. Water always makes things lighter. So our joints are cushioned with synovial fluid, which are mostly water. Our brain and spinal cord have cerebrospinal fluid, but on the outside and the inside, helping cushion them. And cerebrospinal fluid is mostly water. So all the fluids in our body are water-based because they're all derived from our blood. And our blood matrix is plasma, which is mostly water. Another important inorganic compound in the body are the salts. We mentioned sodium chloride, but there are other salts in the body, and salts are basically defined as these ions that dissociate when they are in water. In other words, they quit being attracted to each other and they break into separate parts. These salts form these ions that are necessary for physiological function. And ions basically are electrolytes, charged particles, and one of the main things they do conduct the electrical currents that we find in action potentials or impulses. Almost all the salts are dissolved in water, except for the salts that we actually find in bone and in teeth. Those will not dissolve in water, or our bones would dissolve. Acids and bases play extremely important roles in the body, and we define them. We kind of intuitively know what they mean, but we define them as acids being something that actually releases the proton or hydrogen ion in different amounts. And the more it releases, the more that it reacts within water by releasing that, then the stronger an acid it is. Whereas bases do the opposite. Instead of releasing protons or hydrogen ions, they actually accept them, or they actually release hydroxide ions. Now, we actually can combine these, and they will buffer each other, and they'll actually form water and a salt. So if we put sodium hydroxide with hydrochloric acid, it will react to actually form salt and water. Here we actually see the pH scale, and pH is measuring the relative concentration of those protons or hydrogen ions that are being released from different substances. And if we have a pH of 7, we say it is neutral, and this is really based on the nature of water. water does dissociate between a proton and a hydroxide ion, but they're always in equal amounts. So everything is based on that. So something that actually releases more protons than hydroxide ions, or just more protons, period, the more percentage it releases, the stronger the acid it is. Now, something that actually either absorbs those protons or hydrogen ions, which of course mean the same thing, so I'm saying both of them. So if something actually gains those hydrogen ions, accepts those, then it is a base. And the more percentage that they accept, the stronger the base. In the body, we only have weak bases, but we do have at least one strong acid, but we have some weak acids. The strong acid, of course, is a form of hydrochloric acid that we actually find in our stomach. Continuing to look at this pH scale, this is actually formed on a logarithm, and so if we say 7 is neutral, then everything below 7 down to 0 would be increasingly acidic, because we have an increasing number of protons or hydrogen ions that are released. And one way we can look at this is, if you'll notice that Coke and beer and vinegar have a pH of 3, which means they are 10 times more acidic than something like tomatoes, which has a pH of 4, but they are 100 times more acidic than something with a pH of 5, like black coffee. Now, if we look at something very acidic, like lemon juice, it would have 10 times more acidic than Coke. It would be 100 times more acidic than tomatoes, and it would be 1,000 times more acidic than black coffee. On the other hand, if we look at our alkaline or base side of our graph, we see that everything above 7, moving towards 14, is increasingly alkaline or basic. So in the same way, this logarithm works the same way. If we look at something like bicarbonate of soda, which has a pH of 12, we're saying it's 10 times more acidic than something like household ammonia. We're saying it's 100 times more acidic than something like the Great Salt Lake, and even 1,000 times more acidic than something like stomach antacids. Now, it doesn't mean everything is exactly 8, 9, 10, 11, or 6, 5, 4. For instance, blood, we usually say has a pH of about 7.4. But in reality, it's really a range, at least arterial blood is in a range according to where it's at in the body and what's going on, from anywhere from 7.35 to 7.45. So we would actually say that blood is slightly alkaline, and our body buffers it to keep it that way because we are sometimes releasing acids such as lactic acid into the blood. So we actually have to release some bases that would help balance that. And the main base we're releasing is something called bicarbonate ion. We'll talk about that later on. Okay, so besides the inorganic compounds or molecules, we also have organic molecules. And of course, there are 4 organic molecules: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So let's talk about the carbohydrates, which are basically sugars and chains of sugars. Now, since it's an organic molecule, it does have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in it. And as a matter of fact, in a carbohydrate, we always see these 3 in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, meaning that for every carbon we have twice as many hydrogens, but the same number of oxygens. Now again, these are sugars and chains of sugars, and so we basically classify the different carbohydrates by their size. The simplest being the monosaccharides, or the individual simple sugars. And then we also have things called disaccharides, meaning 2 sugars hooked together. Matter of fact, when you eat what you call sugar or table sugar, that is basically sucrose, and that's actually a glucose and a fructose molecule connected to form the disaccharide. Then we have what we call many chains of sugars hooked together. We call those our polysaccharides, and we'll see some examples of things like starches, cellulose, glycogen. These different things are many chains of sugars, so we'll look at some examples of those.